1 pot, 1 burner, 20 dinners. That is the whole list. Every single entry on it costs less than a fast food meal, takes less than 1 pan to make, and tastes like someone actually cooked. Not reheated, not ordered, actually cooked. Your grandmother never owned a kitchen full of equipment. She owned a good pot and the knowledge to use it, and that combination fed a family through decades of hard weeks without a single apology. Number 19 turns a handful of pantry staples into the kind of chicken and dumpling soup that costs almost nothing and tastes like it simmered all day. Number 3 turns 1 pot into 4 nights of dinners. Why did we ever convince ourselves that cooking alone meant cooking less? Subscribe now and let us fix that. Number 20. Tomato soup and rice. 1 pot. 1 can of tomato soup, 1 cup of uncooked rice, enough water to cover everything, simmered low until the rice absorbs the tomato broth and turns tender and slightly sweet. That is the complete dinner, and it costs almost nothing to make. Solo seniors who assume a real meal requires multiple elements need this one specifically, because a single pot producing something this satisfying from 2 pantry staples genuinely changes how a person thinks about cooking alone. The rice takes on the color of the tomato as it cooks, turning deep orange and smelling warm and faintly sweet from the back of the stove. Most people reaching for a boxed rice mix today pay several times more for a result that is rarely as good as this version. The can and the rice were always the better option. Nobody just bothered to say so clearly enough until now. Number 19. Chicken and dumpling soup. 1 pot. Chicken pieces, simmered in a pot of seasoned water with an onion and whatever herbs the pantry held, until the broth turns rich and the meat falls apart at a touch. Then, simple dumplings, made from flour and a little fat and just enough water to bring the dough together, dropped into the simmering broth and covered for 15 minutes until they puff into soft, pillowy rounds that absorb the chicken flavor from beneath. Nostalgic boomers who grew up eating this on cold evenings remember the specific smell of that lid coming off, a rush of steam carrying chicken fat and fresh dumpling dough in one wave. It is the kind of smell that makes a kitchen feel genuinely warm, regardless of the temperature outside. A restaurant bowl of chicken and dumplings costs considerably more than this entire pot and rarely produces the same depth of broth that a slow homemade simmer builds over 45 minutes on a back burner. Number 18. Pinto bean and potato stew. Dried or canned pinto beans and diced potato, simmered together in 1 pot with a little garlic, a pinch of cumin, and enough water to cover everything comfortably, cooked low until the potato softens into the bean broth and everything thickens into something genuinely substantial. The starch from the potato does the same job a cup of cream would do in a more expensive version of this dish, thickening the broth naturally without adding any cost at all. Cost-conscious viewers stretching a grocery budget across a long week will find this dish produces 4 full servings from ingredients that together cost less than a single restaurant side dish. The cumin blooms into the broth as the pot heats, turning the whole kitchen warm and slightly smoky before the beans have even had a chance to soften. This is a complete dinner built from staples most households already have sitting in their pantry, without any plan attached to them. Number 17. Tuna noodle. Casserole, stovetop. Everything that makes tuna noodle casserole worth eating, made in 1 pot on the stovetop in under 20 minutes without an oven required. Canned tuna, egg noodles, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a cup of water, everything cooked together until the noodles soften into the sauce and the tuna distributes through every bite. No baking dish, no preheating, no second pan for the topping. Just 1 pot, 1 spoon, and a dinner that tastes deliberately made rather than thrown together in a hurry. Overwhelmed modern parents who need a weeknight dinner ready before the whole household unravels on a Tuesday evening will reach for this repeatedly, because it delivers something everyone at the table recognizes and wants without demanding anything the kitchen does not already have. The sauce thickens as the noodles cook, turning creamy and savory in a way that makes the pot smell like effort, even though the whole thing came together in minutes. Number 16. Lentil and vegetable soup. Green or brown lentils, a diced carrot, a stalk of celery, a little onion, everything into 1 pot with enough water or broth to cover generously, simmered until the lentils soften and begin releasing their starch into the liquid, and the whole pot turns thick and deeply savory without anything expensive added. Practical home cooks who want a meal that handles itself while they do something else need this recipe permanently in rotation, because lentil soup asks almost nothing of the cook once it goes on the stove. The vegetables disappear into the broth as it reduces, thickening the pot from the inside and carrying a sweetness the raw ingredients never suggested when they were sitting on the counter. A restaurant version of lentil soup costs considerably more per bowl and is frequently thinner and less satisfying than the version made at home from a bag of lentils that costs almost nothing and stretches across multiple meals without complaint. Number 15. Cornmeal. Porridge with molasses. Cornmeal stirred slowly into boiling salted water until it thickens into a smooth, dense porridge that pulls away from the sides of the pot in slow, heavy waves, then drizzled with a spoonful of dark molasses and eaten warm from the bowl. This was breakfast and dinner and supper all at once across working-class households in the South and Appalachia for generations. Built from two ingredients that cost almost nothing and kept a person genuinely full for hours without demanding anything more from the kitchen. Working-class viewers who grew up in households where cornmeal sat permanently in the pantry alongside the molasses jug will recognize this immediately, not as a recipe, but as a specific memory attached to a specific kitchen on a specific kind of morning. The molasses turns thin and slightly warm when it hits the hot porridge, spreading through the surface in dark ribbons that smell of brown sugar and something earthier underneath. Most people today spend considerably more on breakfast for a result that keeps them full for considerably less time. During the Depression, the Works Progress Administration published home economics guidance specifically recommending one-pot cooking as the most efficient use of fuel, time, and ingredients for households with limited resources. That guidance was not a compromise. It was a practical conclusion drawn from studying how real families actually fed themselves through hard years. A single pot on a single burner uses less gas or wood than a full stove of cooking, produces less cleanup, and concentrates flavor in ways that multi-pan cooking rarely matches. Your grandmother already knew that. The WPA just confirmed it in writing. Number 14. Rice and canned tomato skillet. Cooked rice stirred into a pan of canned diced tomatoes, seasoned with garlic and a pinch of cumin. Everything simmered together until the tomatoes cooked down into the rice, and the two become something that tastes considerably more involved than opening a can and reheating leftover rice. This dish traveled into American kitchens through diaspora communities from Latin America and the Caribbean. Families who already understood that rice and tomato cooked together rather than served alongside each other is a fundamentally different and better dish. American diaspora viewers who grew up eating versions of this at a family table will find the smell alone, garlic blooming in tomato over warm rice, immediately recognizable regardless of which kitchen it came from or which generation made it. The whole thing comes together in one pan in under 15 minutes and costs almost nothing per serving, making it one of the most efficient dinners on this entire list without ever tasting like efficiency was the point. Number 13. Oatmeal stretched into a savory bowl. Steel-cut or rolled oats, cooked in salted water or broth instead of plain water, finished with a fried egg on top and a pinch of black pepper, eaten as a full dinner rather than a breakfast. Most people have never considered oats as a savory dinner ingredient, which means most people have been leaving an enormously cheap and filling pantry staple sitting idle every evening for years. Curious younger viewers who approach cooking as a problem to be solved rather than a tradition to be followed will find this one immediately interesting, because it reframes a familiar ingredient entirely without requiring any new equipment or technique. The oats cook up thick and slightly nutty in broth, tasting nothing like a sweet breakfast bowl, carrying a savory depth that holds the egg beautifully without needing any sauce or additional seasoning beyond what went into the cooking water. A full bowl costs almost nothing and delivers genuine satisfaction in under 15 minutes from start to finish. Number 12. Navy bean and ham hock soup. A ham hock, dropped into a pot of soaking navy beans with an onion and enough water to cover generously, simmered low for the better part of an afternoon until the beans turn completely tender and the ham releases its smoky richness into the broth, and the whole pot becomes something that smells like it has been cooking since morning. Family heritage viewers who remember a grandmother starting this pot early on a Sunday and letting it run while the family came and went throughout the day will recognize this specific smell immediately, that particular combination of pork fat and bean starch and onion that fills a house in a way no other cooking quite manages. The ham hock costs very little at most grocery stores and produces several hours of flavor that no bouillon cube or broth substitute ever honestly replicates. A restaurant bowl of ham and bean soup charges several times more than the cost of this entire pot, and is almost always thinner and less satisfying than the version a slow afternoon at home produces. Number 11. Egg drop soup, depression style. A pot of salted water or thin broth, Brought to a gentle simmer, 2 eggs beaten and poured in a slow, thin stream while a fork stirs the surface in slow circles, the egg cooking instantly into thin, silky ribbons that float through the broth like pale gold threads. This is the original egg drop soup, made in American kitchens long before any restaurant version existed, built from almost nothing by households that understood a beaten egg. In hot broth was a complete and genuinely satisfying dinner. Solo seniors cooking alone tonight need this one specifically, because it takes under 10 minutes from a cold stove, uses almost no energy, and produces something warm and restorative that feels considerably more nourishing than its ingredient list suggests it should. The broth turns slightly richer as the egg cooks into it, each ribbon carrying a delicate savory flavor that a bowl of plain broth never quite achieves on its own. 1 pot, 2 eggs, 10 minutes, and dinner is done. Number 10. Creamed corn and potato chowder. 2 cans of creamed corn and 2 diced potatoes, simmered together in 1 pot with a little onion and enough water or milk to bring everything to a loose chowder consistency, cooked until the potato softens and the cornstarch thickens the whole pot into something considerably richer than its 2 main ingredients would suggest working alone. Sentimental grandchildren who remember a grandmother producing bowls of this from a stovetop on cold afternoons will understand immediately why this chowder has appeared at family tables across the Midwest and South for decades without anyone ever writing it down formally. The sweetness of the corn and the starchiness of the potato work together in the broth, each one contributing something the other lacks, until the pot smells like a farmhouse kitchen, in a way that most modern convenience food never honestly captures. A bowl of corn chowder at a restaurant costs considerably more per serving and is rarely as thick or as sweet as the version this pot produces in 20 minutes. Number 9. Black-eyed peas and greens, 1 pot. Black-eyed peas and whatever sturdy green the kitchen had available, collards or turnip greens or mustard greens, cooked together in 1 pot with a piece of smoked meat, or just a spoonful of bacon grease if no meat was on hand. Simmered until the greens turn silky and the peas soften into the pot liquor, and everything tastes like it has been going low and slow since midday. This combination has fed families across the American South for centuries, carrying cultural significance in African American communities that runs far deeper than any single recipe could account for. American diaspora viewers who grew up eating this at a New Year's table or a Sunday family dinner understand without being told that this pot represents something larger than the ingredients it contains. The pot liquor at the bottom of the bowl, the dark, smoky, faintly bitter liquid left behind by the greens, is worth soaking up with cornbread until the bowl is completely clean and nothing has been wasted. Here is the part that should make you think twice about every cooking show you have ever watched. The multi-course, multi-pan dinner was never the standard in American home cooking. It was an aspirational product sold by magazines, appliance companies, and eventually television to convince households they needed more equipment, more ingredients, and more complexity to produce a real meal. One-pot cooking was systematically rebranded as the food of people who had given up, rather than the food of people who understood efficiency. That rebranding sold a lot of pots and pans. It also made generations of people feel apologetic about cooking, in the way their grandmothers always had. Who told us that 1 pot was not enough? Drop your best 1-pot dinner in the comments, then keep watching, because this list is just getting to the good part. Number 8. Potato and cabbage soup. A head of cabbage, quartered and roughly chopped, several diced potatoes, a little onion, everything into 1 pot with enough salted water to cover, and simmered until the cabbage turns silky and sweet and the potato begins to break down slightly and thicken the broth from the inside. This was survival food across immigrant communities throughout the American Midwest and Northeast for generations, brought over by families from Eastern Europe and Ireland and Germany who recognized that cabbage and potato together in a pot could sustain a household through a hard winter on almost no money at all. Cost-conscious viewers who need a dinner that costs almost nothing and produces several full portions will find this becomes a regular rotation meal within the first week of trying it. The cabbage releases a slight sweetness into the broth as it softens, turning from something sharp and raw into something almost buttery by the time the pot has been going for 30 minutes, filling the kitchen with a warm, faintly sweet smell that builds slowly from the stove. Number 7. Chicken and rice, 1 pot. Chicken thighs, browned in the bottom of a pot until the skin turns golden and the fat renders out. Then raw rice added to that same pot, along with broth and a little seasoning, everything covered and cooked together until the rice absorbs the broth and the chicken fat and turns fragrant and slightly golden in a way that plain rice cooked in water never achieves. Family heritage viewers who remember a parent or grandparent making this on a Sunday afternoon will recognize the specific smell of chicken fat toasting the rice before the liquid goes in. Sharp and savory, and immediately appetizing in a way that announces dinner is coming before anyone has lifted a lid. The rice cooks in the same liquid the chicken releases as it finishes, which means every grain carries the flavor of the meat above it without a single extra pan or a single drop of that cooking liquid going to waste in a separate pot. Elsewhere on the stove. Number 6. Tomato and white bean stew. A can of white beans, a can of diced tomatoes, a clove of garlic, a drizzle of olive oil, everything into one pot and simmered until the tomatoes break down completely into the beans and the whole pot turns thick and slightly sweet and deeply savory without a single expensive ingredient anywhere in the process. This stew came into American kitchens through Italian immigrant communities in the Northeast and spread quietly across the country because it required almost nothing and delivered considerably more than its simplicity suggested it would. Practical home cooks who want a dinner that handles itself while they do something else need this in permanent rotation. Because once the pot goes on the stove, it asks almost nothing further except occasional stirring and a little patience. The tomatoes darken and sweeten as they reduce into the bean broth, turning from bright acidic red into something richer and almost jammy at the edges, carrying a depth of flavor that tastes like the pot has been going for considerably longer than it actually has. Number 5. Cornbread and chili, 1 cast iron. A chili built in a cast iron pot from canned kidney beans, canned tomatoes, a little ground beef if the budget allowed or nothing but beans and spice if it did not, cooked down until thick and dark and fragrant, then a simple cornbread batter poured directly over the top and the whole thing slid into the oven to bake until the cornbread sets golden and the chili bubbles up through the cracks. 1 vessel from stove to oven to table. 1 dinner that feeds multiple people for almost nothing. And a result that smells like something considerably more ambitious than a single pot of pantry ingredients. Nostalgic boomers, who remember a version of this appearing at church suppers and family gatherings across the South and Midwest, will recognize immediately that the cast iron did most of the work, holding heat evenly enough to cook the chili and the cornbread in the same vessel without burning either one. The pot goes to the table and serves as its own dish. Number 4. The plain broth pot. A pot of water, an onion, a few peppercorns, whatever vegetable scraps the week produced, simmered low for an hour until the water turns amber and faintly sweet and smells of something indefinably warm and restorative. Then strained and seasoned with salt and eaten plain. From a mug or a bowl as a complete dinner on the nights when appetite was small and the need for something warm was large. Solo seniors who live alone know the specific kind of tired that calls for this dinner, the kind that wants warmth more than food, comfort more than cooking, and a result that takes almost no effort to produce. Depression-era households understood that a plain broth made from scraps was not a failed dinner. It was a deliberate one, built on the knowledge that simplicity served with care was always more than enough. The color of a well-made scrap broth is worth noting. A deep, clear amber that looks nothing like the pale liquid it started as. Food scientists studying slow-cooked one-pot meals have confirmed what Depression-era home economists already published in their own guidance decades earlier. Proteins simmered slowly in liquid retain more moisture and produce more bioavailable nutrition than the same ingredients cooked fast over high heat in separate pans. The collagen in a slow-simmered broth converts into gelatin that supports joint health in ways that faster cooking methods cannot replicate. The flavor concentration in a reduced one-pot liquid exceeds what any combination of separately cooked components produces. The science, in other words, has spent a century catching up to what a grandmother with one pot already knew. Number 3. The 4-day soup pot. 1 large pot of soup made on Sunday from whatever the week's pantry offered feeds a household across 4 completely different meals without returning to the stove for a second cook from scratch. Sunday, it comes hot as a full bowl of soup. Monday, the thickened leftovers become a sauce over rice or pasta. Tuesday, a scoop of it goes into a skillet with an egg for a quick hash. Wednesday, whatever remains gets thinned with water and a handful of whatever vegetable is left in the crisper drawer and becomes something new entirely. Zero-waste viewers who want to cook once and eat thoughtfully across an entire stretch of the week need this system built into their regular routine. Not just the recipe, but the mindset that a pot of soup is never just one dinner. It is the beginning of 4. And the 4th is often the best one because the flavors have had 3 extra days to settle and deepen into each other. Number 2. The single-serving 1. Pot supper. One portion of whatever the pantry offers, cooked in one small pot for one person eating alone tonight, seasoned with the same care that a pot feeding 10 people would receive, and eaten slowly at a table properly set for one. Solo seniors living alone today often feel that cooking a full dinner for one person requires more justification than it actually does, as if a single portion does not deserve the same attention as a larger one. It always did. A grandmother eating alone on a cold Tuesday night never treated her single pot as a lesser thing. She brought it to the table, sat down, and ate it with the same care she gave every other meal she ever cooked for anyone. The steam rising off one pot at one table still counts as a real dinner. It counted every time before this, and it keeps counting regardless of how many seats at that table are currently empty. Number 1. The pot itself, the original kitchen tool. Every entry on this list came from one pot. Not a kitchen full of equipment, not a drawer of specialized tools, not a collection of gadgets that each do one thing and take up space the rest of the time. One pot, one burner, and the knowledge of what to put inside it. That combination has been the foundation of American home cooking for 200 years across every region, every income level, every generation that ever had to feed people through a hard week without much to work with. Farmhouse kitchens in Appalachia ran on one pot. Sharecropper households in the Mississippi Delta ran on one pot. Immigrant families stretching a first American paycheck across a long week in a cold city ran on one pot. The vessel itself never changed. The knowledge never changed. What changed was the noise around it. The industry that spent decades convincing people a real dinner required more than this. More pans, more steps, more equipment, more proof that you were taking cooking seriously. It never did. A good pot, and the willingness to use it is still exactly what it has always been. The most powerful tool in any kitchen. The one thing that never went out of style even when everything around it tried to persuade you it had. Keep it on the stove. Use it tonight. Pick 3 from this list and try them this week. Start with number 19, number 12, and number 1, because together they cover the most comforting dinner on the list, the most historically rooted, and the mindset shift that makes every other entry finally make complete sense. I made the navy bean and ham hock soup myself before writing this, started it in the morning, and let it run all afternoon. And by the time the lid came off for dinner, the entire kitchen smelled like something worth sitting down for. That smell alone was worth the afternoon. Tell me below which one-pot meal from your own family kitchen deserves its own entry on this list, by name if it had one. Not a category, not a general description. The actual dish, the one that appeared in a specific kitchen on a specific kind of evening and never quite left you the way some meals have a way of doing. The one-pot dinner was never a shortcut or a compromise or a sign that someone did not have time to cook properly that evening. It was a decision, made quietly and confidently by people who understood that the best cooking asks the least of you while giving back the most. She knew that without anyone telling her. The pot on her stove proved it every single time she lit the burner. What is the one-pot meal from your family kitchen that nobody makes anymore? Subscribe now and the next list is already waiting.